is something which nobody has solved in the taxonomic sciences, or taxonomy of various sciences. It's virtually.
I think there's another point here, though. What we're trying to do is a very different sort of thing. We're saying that this is a unit which we're giving this sort of name to, called an industry. But we insist that if we're going to use this word industry with capital I, it should be defined by certain specific parameters. Mm-hmm. And these are in area and time and technology and typology. Now, this is a specific kind of proposal, which if like I believe is in your mind, Desmond, when you're suggesting that people take the Kormusen and the example that Tony has there and use that as a model for definitions of similar kinds of phenomena. Yeah. And I believe this would be a very useful thing. Not that everything that we're going to, that every unit that we're going to use in these classifications are going to have to fit these things. But this is will be a very useful.
There will have to be clearly some modification, mm-hmm. and what is going to come out most significantly is the minimum amount of spaces, as it were, we can fill in so far as much of the sub-Saharan material is concerned. And it is really going to show what the basis of these of the nomenclature is.
I think another point, just harking back to Garth's example, no one really knows, when you use the Aterian and the Mousterian, until Antoine's stuff and Tixier's little thing in the Bergvartenstein thing, no one really knew what the Aterian was, and still to this day really does not know the relationship between Upper Paleolithic kinds of elements and Middle Paleolithic kinds of elements, and the degree of difference between it's not established yet.
I know these things. I was just throwing out random examples. I didn't want to be specific.
It was perhaps not a very good one, since it would not qualify under the terms, under the rigid restrictions that we're imposing upon it.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Fred, this is very interesting because it raises another point which has been nagging me for some time. Again, I'd much appreciate some discussion on this. If one is going to use a name to describe an industry, I personally would very much like to see that name taken from a place where a complete numerically undistorted sample of that thing has been obtained, so that when someone comes to you and says, what do you mean by Aterian? You can say, go to that collection from that very place and compare your sample that you've now found with such.
Better not go to Bureau Atir, I'll tell you.
Well, yes.
It happens. The Kormusen is one. It comes from the Kormusa.
Yes, that's just perfect. That's just perfect.
There is a type of.
And the new things that are cropping up are tending to be like this. They are
the Sibylians
represented.
from Jebel, from Sibyl.
You see, this is one aspect which I think your commission on, or your bulletin can have a very, not legislative, but you know, a lot of the things that were done in biology were done by the editors of journals in biology. And this is, I know you're reluctant you're reluctant to establish yourself as an authoritarian figure, but I think this is the kind of thing that, if you're going to say, give this a name, it's like, I believe Joel is editor of this journal, and he says, if you're going to give me a name in this article, I'll accept that name provided you've done the following things. And he writes back to them and says, otherwise take it out. They don't like this, but they do it if they want to publish in these journals.
You know,
Yes.
no, you're absolutely right. And archaeological journals are full of bad uses of words that the editor should just never let.
Now, the geological societies have had to do just this. And they've done it through the journals. And this mimeograph thing that you have would be an excellent place to start just that sort of thing.
But you know, Garth, I'm disturbed by something you say, because what you're essentially talking about is a type collection. However, if you accept the idea of the way that we are using the concept of industry, this is an expression of a range of variation. And you set up an industry on the basis of a number of assemblages, and it's highly unlikely that a single assemblage will show the entire range of variation. Therefore, it cannot be considered a type collection.
Oh, yes, of course,
Well, they're all
everyone realizes this.
Well, you put the whole thing
Yeah.
together,
This
but
is
the
a-
whole thing may not come from one
No,
locality.
of course it won't. It never will.
Hmm.
This is for a convenience for labeling. It's at least something you can hang on to. Everything else would be implicit. Well, what else is one going to do otherwise? You can't call it by 10 names in order to establish the full range of variation within that industry.
think we
within
had
that
to
area.
do most representative
by
assemblage,
assemblage.
No,
Most representative assemblage.
That's
poor,
not when you-
poor
you're dealing with change.
anglicization of an Arabic term which we did not fully understand. And,
Yes,
So
well-
Arkell said.
but even
Regardless of
so,
I'm
in the
not sure
present
that
rules of the
matters.
game,
Yeah.
Yeah.
we could have called it horseback, and it would
Yeah.
still been appropriate.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
You see, we're not giving names to our Central Egyptian stuff, are we, Fred?
No, because we want to avoid this kind of problem.
Yeah.
We want to be certain that we can fulfill the rules we've established for ourselves before we get named.
Another instance of a certain amount of confusion was the use of the term Khartoum variant. The point it actually should have been Shinab variant, which is upset things a little.
Yes, my mea culpa in that direction is that I should never have coined the word Zebekian.
I'll just point out that this concept that Garth's coming up with here is just one dimension short of, in fact, being the cultural stratigraphic unit recommended at Berg-Wartenstein. All you have to do is put this in a stratigraphic context, and it's the same thing.
Yes, yes. What it would do, though, is shuffle up the terminology in sub-Saharan Africa, something awful there, if you rejected, this is a backdoor maneuver to reject a lot of terms which are still represented by or distorted samples.
Not backdoor.
My recollection of the resolution was that in describing further units at whatever cultural stratigraphic level, you base them on certain stated criteria, one of which is this adequate type locality.
Undistorted sealed sample, but
Well, including you have the specimens from that particular locality as a reference, a referent.
yes.
There is one problem with giving kind of temporary names, not giving names, but as we did in Deba, referring to them as a Karat group, but stating clearly that it wasn't an industry level. What Fred is doing happened actually on the Nile in 1910 when the surveys took place, and they didn't want to give them names. They didn't know what they were, so there was an A group, a B group, a C group, and an X group, and they are still firmly in the literature. You know, they just took it as a group and made it into a cultural unit.
But they're gonna take your Karat group and your Kyrgyz group, and that name's gonna stick.
Well,
You
they
say
may,
you think it's
it
gonna be
may
an
well. No, I say I don't have evidence, sufficient evidence to call it.
I realize
Any of
that, but
them
the people who
industries.
read the articles and said, I once set names in the literature, why do you think the Ibro Maruzian is kept? They tried to put it back to Muilan because it's from La Muila, which is the type site. It never worked because the Ibro Maruzian has been in the literature for so long.
And at least it won't go in the literature, Jim, as the Karat industry.
Apropos the lexicon, it does seem to me that we have to be clear in our minds that if we do compile a lexicon of cultural terms in sub-Saharan Africa, they can't all follow Tony's standard.
No, of course not.
Partly because we don't have that kind of data, and partly because some of them will be explaining terms which are dud terms, if you like. And then the lexicon is explaining the sort of fuzzy range of concepts that hangs around this word, not trying to define, trying to remold the fuzzy concepts into a new, precise, shining, gleaming.
Well, one thing I did
Unit.
not do in the Kormusin, which I would want to add to it, it would take a little more work, would be some of the kinds of technological observations we are now making, which were not made for that material. And I think before that would be used as a model, I think those things should be added. Some of the metrics which were not taken. So I don't even consider that complete in a sense of what I would do now.
My suggestion is that if this is the generally accepted kind of approach to the things, that we do not call St. Joan Sangoan industry. See, if you're going to explain Sangoan or explain some other term, you don't use it, limit the whatever terminology that the editor accepts is the one he's going to use, limit it then to those things that will fit that, that have the right kind of parameters to fit this definition. And the other things can be called groups, or they can be called assemblages, or they can be called complexes, or they can be called all kinds of things, but not so that you
Oh, sure,
you
I would
narrow
not
down.
start talking about the Sangoan industry, no.
Yeah.
Not in the framework that we've been discussing, no.
I mean, in point of fact, what the Sangoan is something sort of at a higher level than an industry, I think, if it is a valid entity at all, which is open to dispute. Yeah.
Well, no, Glenn, you had just this problem. You went to the type area, Sango Hills, and you could only find in the collections numerically distorted samples, am I right, from the Sango Hills? You had no samples with all the cores and all the waste and all the rest of it. So there was no comparable, Lord help us, type sample.
Well,
which
the
you could use.
type sample was still in the survey at Entebbe,
Yeah,
but
and
obviously
it was all-
it didn't include the flakes that had
Yes.
to come off from
Yes.
trimming up these large bulky things weren't
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
And then something else happened, that the collection was much reduced. Parts of it have been sent off to various institutions,
Yeah.
I haven't been able to trace it all down yet, but it was just obvious from the content, from the nature of the material itself, it's not all there.
Yes.
But
So
part of
if,
the job is to try to find this along with the rest of it in some sort of stratigraphic context. Now,
Yeah.
whether in fact Sangoan would be an appropriate name to use for such an entity when found, I'm not really concerned about that, but whether in fact this kind of industrial unity is some kind of a useful construct in our work in African prehistory. I just would be concerned about.
There is one point that Desmond raised in his introduction to this afternoon's session. This was the question of measurements and standardizing measurements. This is, it struck me forcibly yesterday. I mean, there were evidently a number of us in the room who were all measuring things. Very often we're obviously trying to measure the same thing. We're doing it in closely comparable ways, but not exactly comparable ways. And I don't think that we can just talk about it some more informally this afternoon, but I doubt if we can tackle the problem today. But I do think that if there is sufficient interest, I would, for one, be interested in trying to organise a comparable meeting sometime, just to deal with archaeometry, if you like, in this sense of it.
Paleolithic archaeometry.
Paleolithic, stone archaeometry.
Foreigners.
It seems to me it doesn't make any difference, in a sense, how we measure
Yeah.
as long as we all do it the same way, so we can compare them.
Yeah, well, it's
We're
worth
measuring it
discussing
by
the pros and cons, but
the greatest length by the greatest width, no matter what the orientation is. That's one thing, but if we do it by the striking platform, that's something else. But we should do it the same way, because it's so basic.
Could
Yeah,
I suggest that sorry, Desmond. Could I suggest that we do have this meeting, that we bring along with us our various toys? I think it would be very useful for each of us to see the ways and tricks and things that we use.
Well, it is, of course, possible to get away from measuring things by oneself entirely. There are ways to use computers for it.
You still gotta hold that thing and
No,
You've still got to
You
pay
don't have
for
to-
it too.
you just
put it in the
there,
machine.
you use holography with circular film, it just takes a 360
Shakes to
degree
pieces.
picture. You'll even record attributes if you take a right?
Well, it
How
seems
do
to
you program the foundations to pay for it?
Well, I don't have to. It's free.
Bring your toy along.
My toy is housed in an entire building. I can't do it.
There seems to be general agreement that we should circulate views such as have been expressed around this table in the bulletin. And I think we should certainly start with getting those who expressed these views this afternoon to give us something that we can circulate. Now, what about the other thing about trying to get some kind of corpus of information together that would be readily available. Do you think that would be valuable?
Exceedingly valuable.
Information, is this the lexicon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did, Glenn and I did some preliminary work on something of this kind in connection with a graduate seminar, which might perhaps for some areas form a basis, but will need a lot of revision and a lot of addition.
Well, it might be useful to
material as
circulate the
well.
individual entries for the lexicon in the bulletin and have people object. You say this is the nuance, this is the set of associations that goes with this word, and people who know something about that can say, well, you're wrong, my understanding is different, and we can enlarge the spectrum to the point where it's worth sort of, because we hope that we're at a point, if you like, or a zone in time where things are going to start being different. And what we're really trying to do is to clarify and organise for new people coming into the field and for different parts of the field where we're not ourselves familiar, what these words have meant now before hopefully we start gradually wearing them away.
All right, well, we'll do this as well. Do you, would anybody like to express any views on the value of meetings of this kind?
Well, I'd like to propose a vote of thanks to Fred Wendell for arranging this one. And, yeah,
Well,
certainly.
that's misdirected.
We-
It's only because you saw the labor.
Well, and to you and your staff and students. We really have gotten a great deal out of this.
Wholeheartedly seconded, approved.
I think
Would
we've
you
gotten a
as
great deal
well
out of it.
convey in some means or other, perhaps we should do so by in letters, our very great appreciation to our very charming hostesses of the last 2 nights, 3 nights.
3 nights.
That may, thank you very much indeed. One last point, what kind of report should we put out on the discussions, the results of the conference that we have been having here? And also, of course, in this connection, a very sincere vote of thanks to the Wenner Gren Foundation and Mrs. Osmondson, Director of Research, without whose assistance we should not be here today. What kind of, it should be, I think, only a brief report. Or you suggested current anthropology?
Current anthropology.
Yes, yes. Right. Is somebody going to transcribe all these tapes? Or can we leave it to us
We have,
to work out?
I would prefer not to transcribe these tapes.
Yeah.
We don't have Paul DeVore to sit here and do it. With that.
They were really to help us, and because we've received a lot of ideas here that will help us in our own discussions and considerations for the future. And we didn't know but what there might be some interest on the part of someone having a record made of things, which really just not made in the formal sense that we would make transcriptions to circulate or use them in any sense of that matter. Don't believe that most of what we said is worth recording.
Well, yes, yes. Well, I think it's been a great success. I got a great deal out of this with the examination of these collections. Possibly we might perhaps try and arrange another one when Glenn gets his East African material back and we get the material from the Sahara. It might be interesting to meet and look at that, pull it apart, see what we really
So I
need.
might combine that
Yes.
with the measuring.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Mm. Well,
How shall we go about the formality of this report? Shall we do it together? What's the thing? Will you do it, or what? I'm sorry.
why don't we do it together? I think
We'll solve that.
you find some willing helpers.
Slaves.
Well, thank you, Fred, on behalf of us all, very, very sincerely.
Yeah, let me make one little possible announcement. Desmond would like to want to take some pictures of some of the artifacts, and I'm sure that
Please.
I'm gonna lay them out. Trying to, I don't know where.
We'll have to lay them in the basement. I guess we'll need to get some lights down there though
Yeah.
for you to, so that you can take.
Because Fred goes outside, you know, in the sunlight and put it on the ground. And takes
Yeah, but
pictures
it's a
of
bit
it.
tricky.
A little bit tricky to do it
It
now.
is.
Well, we're fully set up
Have them all
upstairs.
derived.
Yes, we
Right.
could. We have light tables and everything upstairs.
Cameras, the whole bit?
Have you?
Yeah.
You mean we could go up and use those,
The
or
dog?
do you mean that
The
you
photographic
could do it for us?
Sure, we've got a studio.
This is the Hero building.
We have no personnel to do them, but we have the equipment.
Yeah. But I've got a camera, and if anybody wants a set, I mean, 2 people, 3 people, I think, already said that they would like a set of slides. I'd be more than glad.
Well, if you can set up another camera, we can go
Extra
that much
shot.
faster. I
Among
brought
other
some film
things,
as well.
we already have slides for the Cornucian assemblages, for some of the Nubian Mousterian assemblages, and I think for some of the Garden.
Very weak.
But the Cornucian ones are quite good,
And for Fred, yeah.
and the copies can be made of those very easily.
Yes. Great.
Oh,
We
you
need
just
to-
let me know which ones you want.
Somebody will
look
let me
at.
know how many,
Set
you know,
them
who
up.
wants copies.
Just about the rest,
Quite
except for the
good.
corn.
Well,
Could I ask Frank and Reed and Scott and Fickery, at least if y'all will make yourselves available, I'll go down and open up the doors for the Nubian stuff that we had in the morning now, the Nubian things we had in the morning are all in the basement. And if you'll either see me or see one of these people, or Tony, we will show you in the basement where it is.
Thank you very much.
And then the material that is from Central Egypt, the material from Israel, is all upstairs, either in Tony's lab or my lab.
Except for my stuff, which is downstairs.
And your stuff's
My
downstairs.
stuff's downstairs.
All of the trays that we've had open are still out, so that we don't have to get out additional trays unless you're interested in material that wasn't shown. There's no problem about getting the things out. It's quite easy to get to.
Merge. 341.
341, Murray Spring.
We can go up there first of all.